and good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from around the globe. We're really excited to welcome you to our next and important session on Wellbeing Society. My name is Shannon Turner. I'm the Executive Director of the Public Health Association of BC. We're thrilled to be able to offer this conversation and dialogue today from some of the most progressive thought leaders that we have in our working right now in this space. I want to share that my pronouns are she and her, and that I'm gratefully joining you from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen and Songhees nations. I'm also really thrilled that we have such a wonderful representation from across the country and British Columbia participating in this dialogue. If we could just put up the territorial acknowledgement, please, Cheryl, because we do work across Turtle Island and partner with many of the First Nations and original inhabitants of this land, and we do so with profound gratitude, and we seek to serve as deep allies in the work of reconciliation. And we can't talk about a well-being society without acknowledging the importance of that, of a restorative and healing practice and efforts towards deeper unity and understanding. So I'm grateful to be here. It's my privilege to introduce as well our two co-chairs for the Wellbeing Society efforts. We have Dr. Lindsay McLaren, who I always say is an honorary member of PHABC and who has supported all of our congresses and institutes and been a very active partner in particularly focusing on well-being economy and the kind of movement that it needs to change global systems to be more responsive. And also Dr. Trevor Hancock, and many of you know Trevor as the founder of the Green Party of Canada originally, a incredibly active researcher, academic, and practitioner who's really led some significant work around planetary health, and in particular practice for public health and the kinds of work that public health practitioners can do to really promote environmental and planetary health well-being. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our chair today, which is Trevor Hancock, and he will bring us forward and welcome the rest of our guests. Oh, I see John Miller in the room. Great to see you, John. Over to you, Trevor.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Or in the case of Marie in Wales, good evening, and thank you in particular for being here. I'm just going to pop my screen up here, and we're here to talk about this, the well-being of future generations, and this is part of an ongoing series of webinars that we've been running on the Wellbeing Society. We're going to take a break over the summer, so our next webinar will be sometime in the fall, probably in September, and these are some of the topics that we still would like to talk about. We talked earlier about making peace with nature. We did a webinar on that, but of course we need to make peace with each other. The notion of national security is natural security is national security. It's a very interesting idea that came out of a speech from the Minister of Defense back in October. And you can see a number of other issues. All of these issues basically, in one way or another, come out of our analysis of the Geneva Charter for Wellbeing and an analysis of that Lindsay and I did some time ago. So that's where we will be going. All of this work, as I said, is rooted in the Geneva Charter. And if I can get my screen to move, which it doesn't seem to want to. There we go. So this is the definition of well-being societies from the Geneva Charter. And what I particularly want to emphasize is that the definition includes future generations as part of the concern. And that is directly relates to this topic, and in particular to the really quite amazing work in Wales, and then the work that is happening here in Canada to try and take us to the same place. So our two speakers for today, I will introduce them both and then turn it over to Marie. So Marie Brousseau-Navarro is Deputy Commissioner and Director for Health at the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner. Imagine having an office for future generations and a commissioner for that role. In particular, relevant to us, Marie is a constitutional lawyer. She leads on the Commission's health and well-being mission to facilitate a transformation in the way we keep people healthy, with a greater focus on prevention in the long term, which is exactly the business we're in, of course. So we're going to hear from Marie about the experience in Wales and its potential relevance to Canada. And then we're going to hear from Dr. Paul Kershaw. Paul is a policy professor at the University of BC's School of Population and Public Health, a public speaker. Many of you may see his regular column in the Globe and Mail as well. And he's founder of Generation Squeeze, which is a think and change tank promoting well-being for all generations by championing generational fairness to preserve what Canadians hold sacred: a healthy childhood, home, retirement, and planet. So without further ado, let me turn this over to Marie and leave you to tell us about well-being of future generations. As soon as I can find the button to get out of here.
Okay, and I'm finding the button to share my screen. Brilliant. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So as you said, I am very fortunate to be the Deputy Commissioner and Director for Health for the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. I'm sure you can hear from my accent and from my name that I am adopted Welsh from France originally. And I think I have one of the best jobs in the world, which is to help transform how we do everything every day and to really create a future we want and we want for our future generations. So in Wales, we are very proud to have a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And that's the framework for what we want. And you can see that our example has been described across the world as being fascinating, inspiring, pioneering, being a lighthouse. And the quote I like in particular is from Professor Jonathan Boston from New Zealand, where he said what's really remarkable with what we have is the breadth, coverage and ambition of our legislation. So that's what I will share with you today. And we have now 10 years experience of doing every day future generations thinking rather than talking about theories and models. What I love is that we do it every day. So I am sure you know different levers for change, and these are the ones we like to use in our office. And it really shows that more than legislation, what is really driving the change is the mindsets and beliefs. It's when there's a will, there's a way attitude. And then the powerful levers of change are system working, collaboration, and exchange knowledge. And as a lawyer, I'm quite sad to see policy and regulation quite back on the left, So not being such levers because they are often codifying what change has happened before. But where our legislation, I think, is really clever is that it's embracing these levers of change and it's creating a whole system in order to protect future generations, but also to improve our well-being today. So you can see we have a common vision, we have indicators, so a way to see what's happening. We have duties on different groups and different of people. We have very clear ways of working, and we also have an accountability system and a monitoring by our office and the Auditor General. So you see, it's a system for system thinking and for present and future at the same time. So now I will talk to you about the why we have this legislation and how it came about, because it's a question people are asking us all the time. So Wales, sadly, is really at the bottom of the UK nations. We have the poorest population, the slowest economy, highest levels of health issues, etc. So we really needed to be quite bold and drastic to come out of where we were. And also because Wales as a nation is really a caring nation who are still a people of bards and culture, and that gives really a specific context for the legislation. And then it has happened progressively. So in 1999, we had devolution. So it's a form of a decentralization of legislative powers as well as administrative ones. And from the start of this devolution, sustainability has been part of what Wales wanted. So in 1999, when we only had an executive assembly, there was a power, so not a duty, a power to make a scheme to promote sustainable development in Wales. So that's really important because you will see the graduation. So it started as a power, so you may or may not do it, and it's only about promoting the sustainable development. And then at the same time, in the UK was created a Sustainable Development Commission. So for the whole of the 4 nations of the UK, who was advising on climate and sustainability in general. But the UK government decided to abolish this organization. So in response to that, Wales decided they didn't want to lose that organization they had. And because they had that scheme as well, their attachment for sustainability, they created a non-statutory Commissioner for Sustainable Futures. So that was a non-statutory body. It was like a governmental agency. And it was charged with promoting a voluntary sustainable development charter. Yeah, so you see the progression. And then when the United Nations were creating the Sustainable Development Goals, that's what the Minister of Sustainability of the time took as an opportunity to create the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So our legislation starts as the transposition in national law of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we were the first nation to do this, and sadly, we are the only one who still have done this many years on. But that's one element of the legislation. So after a 2 years national conversation with the people of Wales, we created 7 national well-being goals, which are illustrating 4 dimensions of well-being, which are economic, social, environmental, and cultural. And what's really important is that for us in Wales, these 4 dimensions of well-being are equal. That means the economy can no longer trump the environment, but in the future, the environment cannot either trump the economy. It's about recognizing this holistic element, is that we need both, and we also need the social elements and the cultural elements, because we need all these 4 things to create one well-being. So it's SDGs plus culture. And Wales is really proud of its cultural well-being and this attachment to culture. So the main provision of our legislation is to say that public bodies in Wales must carry out sustainable development. Full stop. Again, as a lawyer, that full stop is my favorite because it doesn't say only when or except when, or so it's a freestanding obligation. And that obligation is further defined as the process of improving our economic, social, environmental, and cultural well-being of Wales by doing 2 things. First, seeking to achieve our 7 national well-being goals and acting in accordance with the Sustainable Development Principle. And for that, you have 5 ways of working. So you see the obligation is to improve today's well-being in its holistic conception, but doing this not at the detriment of future generations. So that's the second direct reference to the United Nations work. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. As I said, these 7 well-being goals were defined with the population of Wales. So that's really important because that's what helps depoliticize it. That's what convinces politicians as well that it's the common vision we want and that all politicians should have it. So 2 years national conversation with schools, everywhere, and I can give more detail on how that was done. And what the conversation was, and the main question of this conversation was, what would you want Wales to be in 2050? So these 7 national well-being goals represent the vision that Wales wants for Wales in 2050. So the national conversation only had 6 of these goals, but while the bill was being agreed in Parliament, they added the global responsibility because they felt like it was something really missing. But the people of Wales didn't necessarily think about the global responsibility. Then we have all sorts of issues around devolution because foreign affairs and international elements are not devolved to the Welsh Parliament. So we had to find something which would work but give that sense of global responsibility. And to make it a bit clearer, we have created this breakdown of what the concepts and elements are within all of these goals. So, it's about decent and fair work, it's about having a low carbon society, etc. So it's all the goals detailed one by one. But I'll bring you back again to the definition of the goals, because that's what makes us a recognized well-being framework or well-being society. And if you look at our definition of prosperity, you will see that it's far from GDP. It says it's about an innovative and productive low-carbon society. You see, it's about the society, living within the limits of our global environment, but also sharing wealth through skills, education, and decent or fair work. So that's why we are all often described as a well-being framework. But I like to say we are a double well-being framework. It's because there's more than GDP, which matters for us with all of our goals and indicators, but also in the definition itself of what we think is economic prosperity. So an important part of our framework is that we have national indicators. So lots of countries talk with us about, what indicators do we use, how do they work, and so they've only been slightly tweaked once in 10 years, and I don't think there's more discussions to continue to change them. So we think it's a good set of indicators. Of course, indicators are never perfect. They could be slightly different, but we think they give us what we need. It's a combination of subjectives and objective indicators. And again, I'm very happy to talk more about that. So to complement our indicators, we also have set milestones. So I first was hoping that the milestones would be much more the way towards the 2050 vision, but the government at the time chose to more create milestones of where they would want to be in 2050. We can debate that, but without the milestones, we didn't have a sense of speed. And I remember in the early days when we didn't have milestones yet, thinking, oh my goodness, at that speed, we will reach the goals in the next millennium. So the milestones were really important to, speed up things, start to give them timeline and a rhythm, like a faster rhythm of activity. So I highly recommend them. So that was the first part of the legislation, which is everybody should aim at achieving these national well-being goals. And they need to do that by setting their own well-being objectives, which needs to maximize their contribution to every single one of the goals. So the purpose is to avoid having our health authorities only looking at the Healthier Wales goal. They have to think of all the other ones as well. Same for our environment agency called Natural Resources Wales. They have to work on the ecological resilience, of course, so a more resilient Wales, but they also have to work on all the others, the community cohesion, the prosperity, the culture and language, global responsibility, etc. So I really like that element of legislation is we stop doing only one thing for one purpose, is as we are doing something, what else can we do at the same time to have maximum impact around against all these dimensions of well-being? Because again, well-being is complex, it's a whole, and we need as much as that as possible. So the second part is that we need to do that, but not compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So it's quite a difficult concept and something which is not easy to do or demonstrate. So in order to do that, the legislation brings in the concept of 5 ways of working, which are long-term thinking, taking a preventative approach, collaborating and integrating your work with others, and involving the people affected by your decisions. So that's by demonstrating you have done these 5 ways of working, that you can satisfy yourself and our office that you have acted in accordance with the Sustainable Development Principle. So when you look at the details of the 5 ways of working, you can see that it's just a codification of good administrative practice. When I tell my children, that my job is to help people think long-term, take a breath, they are a bit like, duh, don't we do it already? And so that's really interesting, because that's really also the common problems we have as administration across the globe. And that's what is really giving the other universal element of the legislation is the SDGs are common to all of us. And then the 5 ways of working and the administrative practice is really common to many, many countries. So that's why the model can work and be transposed to other nations quite easily. And the final part of the legislation is that public bodies should in particular focus on using these 5 ways of working and maximization across the goals within their own internal operations through what they describe as corporate areas for change. So it's about finance, assets management, procurement, corporate planning, etc. So our office spends a lot of time with public body ensuring they embed the legislation at the core and in their way of operating, as well as on the outcomes they have for their populations. So the final element of the legislation is that these duties only apply to the public sector, to public bodies in the legislation. So there are currently 55 of those, so environmental agency, local health boards, local government, and then national bodies like the National Museum, National Library, Sports Wales, etc. So there's a finite list of individual bodies. But then the legislation is also forcing collaboration on a regional basis through what are called public services boards. And you can see on the right-hand side of my slides that it's the local authority, local health board, fire and rescue services, and the environmental agency. But because of devolution boundaries, the law cannot affect the private sector or non-devolved elements. So that's where I think they were quite clever in saying that this body must invite the police, which is not devolved, probation services, and the voluntary sector. So that's how we kind of work around the devolution boundary. So you wouldn't have that problem in Canada. And in other countries, we advise, you could have it cross sector. We only did it for the public sector because we couldn't do the rest. But it's a question you might want to explore as well. So also the legislation is creating all these duties, but it doesn't have a specific enforcement mechanism. So that means that by default, judicial review would apply. I don't know how your judicial systems work, but I imagine it must be close to the British one. So judicial review is very hard to do. It's about proportionality and being unreasonable in the application of your duties. So we don't think it would be any easy at all for anyone to use the legislation to prosecute. And we also have interesting question as to how you show that you can use, so you are affected and you have a right and an interest in bringing proceedings. So that's not a surprise. That was done by design. It was part of the conversation with the people of Wales and the white paper. So what should be the status of the legislation and what should our office be? Should it be like an ombudsman? Should it be, and it was decided at the time that it was only an administrative piece of legislation, an inspirational one, something to raise the bar and to help public sector and the governments to do better and to raise the bar. So that's something which is being discussed a lot now. But after 10 years review, should we make the legislation much more hard-biting or not? And there are pros and cons, and I'm very happy to debate that with you if you want later on in the conversation. So now let's look at how it works in practice, and I've given you the theory. Let's look at what it does. So the legislation is really clever in when you apply it. It first enables you to see connections between things and to really look at causality. So if you take climate change, we all know that climate change is traditionally seen as a physical consequence of human activity on the physical environment. But now it is also becoming a source and a massive source of mental health issues and challenge, especially for younger people and children. So from a consequence, it becomes a cause. The consequence of this distress and anxiety of young people is that they become, they have a feeling of helplessness, and they withdraw as well from civic action and activity, and we have, a generation which is feeling helpless. That has also consequences, and it's also exacerbating inequalities. So that shows you that now this change of things means that on top of the costs you would have had on the environment, you also have socio-economic costs on top of it. So we help see these connections between things which are not always being made. It's also about seeing the connections and to help you find solutions. Here in Wales, we have lots of children in poverty. It's quite shocking. I think 1 in 4 children can be seen as living under the poverty levels. And we also have massive waste of food. And so, of course, we are not saying take the food which is being wasted and give it to people. What we are saying is we need to find innovative ways to distribute both food and wealth so that everyone's needs can be met, whilst at the same time reducing waste and the impact on the environment. Looking at it again on a very practical local level, that's a brilliant example. So there was a new piece of legislation where we needed new drainage systems in the city of Cardiff. So what they did is they collaborated with an engineering firm, our national water company, and the environmental agency. And together, they created this new environment you can see. So as they were digging up the roads, they chose to start with the poorest districts of Cardiff to help, create something which would work for biodiversity and help create regreen, if you want, environmental deserts. It was concrete jungle, as they called it. And so bringing plants and local biodiversity-friendly pieces of land, created lots of active transport roads within it, because obesity is another big problem we have here in Wales. And all the plants are some of those which absorb most pollution as well, because Cardiff has a pollution problem. So you see, from one purpose, which was just to dig up the road and put pipes for drainage, they have created now something about social cohesion, active travel, pollution reduction, etc. So that's what the legislation is about. How can you achieve much more as you are doing things? So other examples of changes in mentality, national policy, I've only chosen 2, but I could go on for days if you wanted on that. So it really helps change, the approach to the economy. So we are focused on the well-being economy. The value for money is really changing as well. Before, especially in procurement, cheapest was best. Now we have new procurement legislation where you have to demonstrate how your purchases are also improving the well-being goals and the socio-economic factors, environmental impact reduced, etc. And it's really interesting. But on that one, we could see on paper, everything is great. But in application and the attitude of civil servants, it was a bit schizophrenic. Some were still very attached to the traditional economic models, and a little bit was changing. So that's something we are watching, and we are calling, for example, a lot for the real living wage to lift as many people out of poverty as we can. And that's working really well, actually, in Wales now. If we look at health, which is a topic which we are all working on, we have seen first a very striking change in the length of time thought about. We had very short term, sometimes 100 days visions or action plans, and so very short term focused with 3 to 5 years visions for bigger policies. But now most of our health boards have 10 years plus visions. So you see, it has really expanded their sight for the future. It has embraced a lot the wider conception of health. Before, health was seen very much into specific service delivery, hospitals and GPs were what health was about. Now it's much more about public health, population health, wider determinants of health. And also a shift of health is about treating ill people into, no, it's about building resilience, thriving communities, and especially with public health professionals, I tell them that it's even more than the absence of illness. And it's really about this, not only resilience, but vibrancy. We want, vibrant populations. And then we've also seen much more collaboration between cross-sectoral collaboration from the health sector with the others, which was really hard because our health service was very insular in a way, in the way people describe their interactions with them. So slowly we are really seeing an opening up and working with the arts and especially arts and culture, social care much more. We are seeing cross-departmental working, etc. So we are seeing really visible changes there. And I can tell you a bit more. Then we are seeing the health bodies embracing much more these other goals and duties, under the other legislation. So, for example, now this Morriston Hospital has created the first solar farm owned by an hospital. And they have also created a vegetable farm where anyone in the community can come and grow vegetables. The vegetables are used and eaten by patients in the hospital, so to improve the quality of food as well. And lots of mental health groups and staff are also using the vegetable gardens. So it's really interesting to see the new mentality which is coming from this. We are seeing, you see, for example, here a collaboration between police, a nursery, and a housing association where they created a space for homeless people to share, again, the space with the other generation. One of my favorite things is this flourishing we are seeing of well-being hubs, where in a hub you find your health services you would expect, your GP, a pharmacy. You are also now finding a lot of yoga classes, group, community groups, etc. But, and that's where I was really happy, it's revolutionary. And you start having financial advice, housing advice, etc. Again, looking at the wider determinants of health, what really impacts your health, it's your money, your house, as well as access to services. So this is growing and slowly changing, and I'm really loving to see that. So then, to be real as well, it's not all rosy and perfect. And so after 5 years, we did that assessment of where we thought public bodies were across the spectrum. So you can see the quality of the implementation by different bodies is quite widespread. We have some doing really well, some doing not that great again. Now, in the next 5 years, we've done the second element of assessment. So on the left-hand side, you are seeing how far they are improving their processes. And on the right-hand side is how their culture, internal people and culture is changing. So you see on paper, they are transforming. They are halfway, I would say, through the transformation on paper in their policies and processes. But in the actual applications, mentality, philosophy, they are still at simple changes, So that's where we need to work with them much more. So every 5 years, we produce a Future Generations report, and in there, we produce a lot of recommendations. So in health, I have focused all my recommendations on wider determinants of health, prevention, working together to achieve this, strong focus on inequalities, which is creating a lot of the health problems. And one specific recommendation for the NHS and the actual service delivery, that I have asked that they include prevention at the start of every single clinical pathway. So that's something we are working with them on now. So how can we do it? Is it possible in the first place? Because if you're on a clinical pathway, it's too late, etc. So very interesting conversations. And so that's a big project for my team this year. And we are also working a lot on budgets. So we have asked the Welsh government to ring-fence funding for prevention, to start giving multi-years funding settlement, because all the really good preventative wider determinants of health projects are often pilots and with short-term funding. So we are really trying to change that and to ensure that we get most of the money again, and sometimes just giving 3-year cycles or more is what we could have. And we have also agreed already in 2017 with the Welsh government an official definition of prevention, because I'm sure you all know how complicated and many different definitions of preventions there are. So we have an agreed definition of prevention, and I am now mapping budgets of lots of public bodies against it, so we can see what is being involved in prevention, if at all, and then which type of prevention it is. And I'm very happy to discuss this a lot. Just to flag that this is different from the definition of the WHO, which most public health practitioners are using. But it's, again, on purpose, because we wanted something universal, which would apply to local authorities, as well as national bodies, as well as the local health boards. And also because the ultimate goal is nation resilience and not the absence of illness. So that's why it's a bit different, but we are using it across the nation. So our office produces all sorts of maturity matrix, self-assessments, reports on topics, on we can do investigations, which are called reviews, where we have formal recommendations at the end of it. And you can find all of those on our website. And very interestingly, a few weeks ago, I don't know if you followed the elections, but we have had a mini revolution in Wales. For the first time in 100 years, Welsh Labour lost elections. So for the first time ever, we have a new government. It's a minority government of the Independentist Party. So that will be a big, big change. And everything I have described to you was created by the same government and the same party in power. So how will a new government change any of these philosophy changes? So I was very reassured yesterday. We had our first event in the parliament, in the Welsh parliament, and a lot of the new elected members from that party as well came to us and are really sold by the legislation, and they want to do more and to help have it implemented even faster. So I'm really optimistic now, but there will be things to watch. So that's the top priorities of the new government. And you see, for health, they say we want to cut waiting lists. And so it's very acute secondary care focused, which is not what we want. But we are very hopeful because they have created the post of a deputy minister for prevention and public health. And that person is supposed to work cross-governmentally to ensure this is happening. So we are in a complete transition. It's quite exciting in a way. I'm a bit relieved that they want to get rid of the legislation, and that, on the contrary, they seem to want to reinforce it. But we need to watch this space. It's only 2 weeks old, that change. So let's see what happens down the line. Here is a slide which I designed for you to show what I think the benefits of a model like ours is that it's enabling you to fulfill your UN obligations. It really gives you strong standing on the international scene. And Wales has gained so much more recognition thanks to our legislation it's really incredible how strong a soft power it has become. Then we are seeing lots of countries following and replicating even sometimes the legislation or wanting to do something similar, from the Balearic Islands, Gibraltar, within the UK, so Scotland and now the Republic of Ireland are really looking at equivalent or slightly different models. It has really helped our governments to be much bolder and do new things, like they did a complete road freeze of every single road project in Wales. They stopped them, reviewed them and changed all of them or cancelled a lot of them. And they said they couldn't have done that without the legislation. The ministers also told us it really helps changing the conversation from we need more roads, we want more cars, we need to go faster from A to B, to we need to think of our grandchildren and their children. Is it really what we want? And what we want for them is a clean public transport system. So how do we do this? And we cannot invest the money in the roads and this at the same time, etc. Then it's really liberating the people who want to change, and that gives them permission. So not only permission to act, but also a duty to act. So the champions within the system could go to their bosses who were blockers before and say, we have no choice now, we have to do it, it's the law. So that has been really helpful to unlock a lot of things internally. Of course, we are seeing improved collaboration. And in health, it has really helped transform. But again, I put the caveat now with the new government, which is a bit back on the focus on waiting list, but from acute secondary care to a wider social model of health, and which again is really fascinating, and we are really proud of.
Thank you, Marie.
And my last slide. So
we actually can't see your slides at the moment; they've dropped off.
And can you see this one?
I think if we need to move on to Paul, if we can.
Okay, I could see Marie's last slide.
Yeah, so that's so it's really just to show that the legislation has enabled us to go, to create a vision for the nations we want. So a vision we have chosen together, and really to enable us to avoid sleepwalking into a future, because every day the future is happening and we are going into it whether we like it or not. So that really gives us back power to do what we want, to where we want to go, and not end up somewhere we don't want to. And also, I don't know, I hope you can see this slide, but the volume of future generations to come after us is estimated at 8 trillion people. And the decisions we make today will affect so many lives. And that's why we really need to get them right and be the best ancestors we can. So this piece of legislation is really what's helping us to get there every day. Thank you very much.
Marie, thank you so much. That's absolutely fascinating. As you can see in the comments there, people are very impressed. They're loving it. It's a roadmap for the future. We've been admiring the work of Wales for a long time now, and it's lovely to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to ask Paul to move into his presentation now and talk about it from a Canadian context in response to what Maria's had to say. And Paul, you're going to have to adjust your display settings again.
There we go. Is that working so that you
That's
see?
it.
Perfect.
Wonderful. So strange today. Well, so wonderful to be with you, and I'm inspired and humbled following Marie today. I just want to start in the way that is our tradition to acknowledge I personally am coming from the unceded land of the Keitsig territory today. And as we think about our responsibilities for reconciliation and how that relates to today's theme, I think that the 7 generations principle that is so common to many Indigenous peoples across our land is really relevant, because the practice of thinking 7 generations ahead and how our decisions today will impact that future is a foundational part of Indigenous governance. And as we reconcile with our colonial past, integrating that into the governance systems for Canada more generally will be such an advance. Let us all acknowledge exactly where Marie started, that Wales is world leading, and darn it, Canada should follow. We must follow. And so in that regard, I'm proud to be at Generation Squeeze leading a campaign for our country to enact legislation to safeguard well-being for all generations. And I want to start with a hopeful spot that the path to achieving that has a decent amount of a momentum in Canada to build from. Back in 2019, Generation Squeeze worked closely with the federal government to ensure that the concepts of age and generation were added to all new Treasury Board applications so that any new spending, that's a limitation, but any new spending will be thinking about the generational implications and the distribution of pros and cons across generations today and moving forward. We do have in our country a well-established quality of life framework that has been worked on. It's not perfect. I can't see Lindsay right now, but Lindsay will know that's got some warts, but it is definitely a significant improvement and offers so much to consider well beyond GDP. And it looks very similar to the 7 well-being goals that Marie already identified for us. And then at StatsCan, a year later, we created a quality of life hub with a range of indicators that once again look very similar to what Marie has been proposing for their National Wellbeing Indicators Framework. And StatsCan is now responsible to routinely report on those indicators. So that is a strength to build from. At provincial government levels, we've had in British Columbia not that long ago a strategic plan that committed to keeping BC working for all generations and planning for all ages and investing wisely in well-being from the early years onward. And in that same year at the federal level, the entire budget was organized around the promise of delivering fairness for every generation. Now, we will know that in that same year, Canada signed on to the UN Declaration on Future Generations. So we have made our domestic commitment to international commitments that are there to protect future generations coming forward. Now, that all did happen under our previous Prime Minister, but it's worth noting that the platform on which current Prime Minister Carney campaigned did very explicitly talk about the need to recognize that intergenerational unfairness is something facing younger generations today, and that despite younger generations investing more time than ever into education per se, for example, the bargain that hard work means a good life isn't panning out, and that there needs to be in our country an effort to restore that bargain going forward. And I think more significantly still, the 2025 government put in place in its first days an entire ministerial committee for the quality of life and well-being. I don't believe we've seen that before in Canada. I still think it's, there's so much room to make it have more meaning and bite, but the fact that it exists is an opportunity for all of us to take advantage of. But if we are going to take advantage of the building blocks that we have and learn from the inspiration that comes from Wales, then we have to recognize that details of the legislation, I think, matter for ensuring, to some degree, that theme of its enforceability that Marie was referencing earlier. Because recent reports coming from Wales, for example, its Auditor General last year indicated that the Act, as wonderful and important as it is not yet driving the system-wide change that was ultimately intended. And the commissioner's report from last year sort of echoed that kind of theme, that more can be done, just as Marie was sharing with us moments ago. It's achieving so much, and yet our ambition is so great. So in response to those observations from Wales about what's working and what could be stronger still, our campaign to enact legislation to safeguard well-being for all generations not only proposes implementing a commissioner who will from the outside evaluate whether or not government is living up to those intergenerational commitments, but also to appoint within government a minister responsible, because so much of the political power happens within government, and we need someone tasked with the responsibility to see the legislation through from a political standpoint. And then to support both a commissioner and a responsible minister, we're advocating for an advisory body of external experts to support both of those roles. And as we think about fine-tuning the details for a Canadian legislation, we think it's going to be especially important to direct additional attention to the financial planning at the highest levels of government that ultimately bring to bear the corporate goals that any government has for our country and our citizens. And to that end, our campaign for legislation is recommending that the legislation require all governments to monitor in their budgets the way they're spending now across different age groups in order to encourage fairness now between generations and going forward. And that monitoring of the age distribution in our current budgets is so critical, because we might say we're a country that, wants to make children first and every child matters, and we can say mom and apple pie things about how we want to protect future generations. But if you track the money, which really reflects where our actual priorities are, it's nearly impossible now not to judge that provincial and federal budgets are anti-child, anti-parent, and anti-young worker. And if we can't even protect younger people today, how are we going to be protecting intergenerational solidarity well into the future? So it's time we need to make sure that we are budgeting for all generations now and going forward. And I'm going to say in a somewhat hokey kind of way that really it's going to be critical for our campaign to enact legislation in Canada to do so around the concept of love and intergenerational love. And we will know that around our family tables, love motivates people to care for young and old alike. And many a parent and grandparent will routinely take pride in making what they might describe as sacrifices to advance the well-being and health of their kids and grandchildren and progeny thereafter to come. We need to take that intergenerational love around the family table and apply it at the cabinet table of our provincial and federal governments across our great land. And guided by that aspiration, I want to take you quickly on a tour to explore what's currently going wrong in our federal and provincial budgets, and then think about how we can fix it by enacting legislation to safeguard the well-being of all generations. And let's start with the federal budget. I mean, is it love when this spring's economic statement announces investments in youth trades, student grants, and home building that are barely visible by comparison with the growth prioritized for senior subsidies over the next 5 years? And is it love when our system of subsidizing income supports later in the life course delivers subsidies to an income level as high as $180,000, but for families with children, we begin clawing back our income supports $100,000 earlier? And in the BC context, is it love when our government provincially increases spending on medical care for seniors 8 times faster than the kindergarten to grade 12 education budget, or childcare spending is flat, or housing is actually cut? Or in Alberta, is it love when government spends 4 times more there on medical care, primarily used by an aging population, than it does on investing in the building blocks for a healthy society? And similarly in Saskatchewan, is it love when spending on medical care for seniors, who represent about 18% of the population, is 4 times larger than childcare and K-12 education combined, and 20 times greater than housing? Or in Manitoba, when medical care for seniors is increased by $500 million, while housing gets nothing? And in Ontario, our most populous province, is it love when medical spending for the aging population or aging baby boomer loved ones receives $7 billion, but the same government then cuts post-secondary spending by $1.3 billion? Or in Quebec, similar pattern, increased investment in medical care for seniors is 3 times greater than K-12 education, 3 times greater than post-secondary, 10 times greater than childcare. And investment in housing is cut at the very moment younger generations are facing unprecedented housing pressures. And I will continue on with that pattern exists in Nova Scotia. And we see it also in New Brunswick, when $600 million is added there for seniors' medical care and long-term care, when that is 3 times more than what the government spends on childcare, K-12 education, post-secondary, housing, and child welfare combined. And rounding it out with our smallest province is at Love in PEI, where the increase in medical spending for seniors is double the entire budget for the early years, grade school education, post-secondary, and housing. And that is a whirlwind tour from coast to coast across almost all of our provinces. And the answer to the question is no, it is not love. Whether we are talking about NDP governments in BC and Manitoba, conservative governments in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and Nova Scotia, and even PEI, or Liberal government in New Brunswick and Ottawa. I hope you see my nonpartisanship in making those observations. We are talking about government budgets that are anti-child, anti-parent, and anti-young worker. And that is precisely why we need legislation to protect younger and future generations that commits to monitoring the age distribution of our spending going forward so that we do invest in well-being for young and old alike. And it's also showcasing for us why it would be critical in the federal context of a Canadian nation that we encourage this legislation at federal and every provincial level, because there's such shared jurisdiction for the key policy levers that influence well-being now and into the future across those two domains. So our task is a challenging one: get Ottawa to do this, but to get each of our provincial jurisdictions to do so as well. Because if we don't have legislation at both provincial and federal levels that is determined to shape our fiscal decisions to invest wisely in young and old alike and safeguard those who come in the future, then I think it is becoming increasingly clear that Wales' other 5 ways of working to protect all generations are less likely to be effective. And when they are less effective, we are seeing very disturbing outcomes. I mean, when governments budge in ways that are ageist against younger Canadians, it's no wonder that research is increasingly showing a massive happiness gap, a massive well-being gap between age groups. I mean, among older Canadians, those over 65 in our country place in the top 8 countries in the world for happiness. If you are under 30, you are 50 spots lower and the worst in the G7. So as we're thinking about jumpstarting that well-being once again for young and old alike, in a public and population health context, it will be critical for our legislation to do one further thing when monitoring how we spend money. And that is to report regularly on the ratio of our spending into what often in our field we call the determinants of health, or for those outside of our field, I'll say the building blocks for a healthy society. How much are we investing in those building blocks by comparison with spending on medical care to treat illness and injury? And we need to do that because health science is very, very clear now in examining the association between government spending and health. And it makes clear that our legislatures are more likely to improve life expectancy and reduce avoidable mortality, illness, and injury when they grow spending on social and educational benefits more urgently than spending on medical care services. This won't surprise our community gathering today. It's a quintessential example of the moral of the story that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But if we wish to preserve health and healthcare as a sacred trust in our country, we're going to have to invest to make people well, as we all know, not just treat them when they fall sick. And so our task is to slow the flow of sickness into clinicals and hospitals. And we need our budgets to double down on that observation. Our budgets need to recognize that when we are waiting to invest until people are ill, that's like showing up with hoses as a firefighter once a building is ablaze with flame. But if we invest more intentionally and urgently into the social education and ecological issues in our budget, that's the kind of spending that prevents sparks from getting out of hand in the first place. And so we really need budgets to be held accountable for recognizing that clinics and hospitals are the last stop, not the first stop in our health system. And that ultimately we need to be budgeting to strengthen those first stops with our neighborhoods, our jobs, our childcares, our schools, our healthy planets, etc. This does mean that we need to build into our well-being agenda for future generations legislation that one of the most important decisions any province or federal government is going to make is in its allocation between dollars for social and education, and if we could moderate more effectively ecological issues by comparison with medicine. And we want that ratio, we want those slices for the building blocks for a healthy society to actually rival and be slightly bigger than what we're doing to invest in treating illness. And regrettably, that is just not what our provinces are doing any longer. This is a representation of a recent budget in BC, which is showcasing that our investments in medical care specifically are more weighty than the combined investments into childcare, housing, post-secondary, grade school, social services, poverty reduction, etc. And the same thing happens again in Quebec, where in many respects, investment at a per capita level on medical care is about 3 times greater than many of the other building blocks for health in that society. And I don't have time in today's presentation to walk you through how this same pattern would once again unfold in all of our provincial jurisdictions. But the bottom line is that when we have that fiscal pattern in our budget priority setting, it's no coincidence that we will spend more on medical care and medical costs will rise, but access to our system does not improve because we are not doing the work of slowing the flow of sickness into our clinics and hospitals. In other words, we're not shrinking the line of patients for the time being. And it will be no coincidence that doctors, many of them now in our community especially, they want to prescribe housing, childcare, poverty reduction, and all the things that make people healthy and well, but that's not in the purview of doctors, that's in the purview of legislators. And it's also not a coincidence why many medical professionals report burning out, even as the number of doctors per capita in our country has increased quite dramatically over the decades. And so these are reasons why the legislation that we build in this country needs to implement the clear expectation that our governments are going to report on an annual basis about the ratio of its investment into the determinants of health by comparison with spending to treat illness and injury. So my friends and colleagues, we absolutely in Canada should build and improve on the Welsh experience. It is world leading. It is self-aware of the opportunities to do better still. And I think that can help motivate us to think about our accountability metrics in our legislation in slightly different ways. And why, as we campaign in our country context to bring the best of the Welsh experience here, we need to be aiming to appoint not only a commissioner, but also a minister responsible, a minister who would be held account within cabinet, a minister that the commissioner could hold to account, and an advisory board to help both of those other 2 roles. We will be, I hope, obliging budget reporting that really recognizes that we may say many a beautiful thing about how younger and future generations matter, but if we don't put our money where our mouth is, then we will never actually truly live up to those expectations. And here we are provided today 2 key indicators, the age distribution and the relative spending on social relative to medical issues as key things to monitor and treat as key performance indicators for our governments in implementing a well-being legislation for young and old alike and future generations. And I think if we can achieve those details in our campaign in Canada, then we will empower the implementation of the full scope of ecological, social, and economic considerations that Marie has so beautifully shared in her discussion of the Welsh Act. We do have a Generation Squeeze, and you can find it with this QR code, and I will be distributing our deck to everyone attending today so you can find the information. A toolkit that will help us make incremental steps to bring the Canadian legislation to a reality, building on those strong foundations I noted when starting. And you will see there information about why we need the legislation, how to contact your elected officials in order to recommend that they embrace it in their platforms and in their priorities when the House sits. Specific calls to action that you can implement yourselves, as well as opportunities to bring these messages to your social media channels and traditional media. Because that is how together we can bring home the best of the Welsh experience to ensure Canada works for all generations so that we safeguard a healthy childhood, a healthy home, a healthy retirement, and a healthy planet. Thank you.
Paul, thank you. Thank you very much. So we're going to have an opportunity here for some feedback and discussion. I want to make a couple of quick points and maybe invite Marie to respond a bit to what Paul had to say, and then we'll throw it open to discussion. And just to let you know, I have to actually leave a little early to get to a dental appointment, so I'm going to leave at 11:20 our time in BC, and Shannon Turner will finish up the session here. A couple of quick points that struck me listening to that. One is, when I think about the sustainable development work in Wales, it brought to mind the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy draft, and I've just popped into the chat the Canadian Coalition for Planetary Health and Wellbeing Society, together with the Wellbeing Economy Alliance of Canada. We submitted a critique of the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy, which is very weak, and certainly in comparison with what's going on in Wales. And there's a link there, so you might want to take a look at that. The second thing I would say is that, in addition, and Paul did mention this several times, but in addition to thinking about a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act for Canada, we really need that to happen at each provincial government level too. And we might want to think about, because I agree, I'm not sure that this is a propitious time to get the federal government to move on this, but are there provincial governments that we think we could get to move? We only need, in some ways, one provincial government to do it to start hopefully a domino effect. So maybe, I mean, I think of Manitoba and the leadership in Manitoba and whether they might be ready for a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, that sort of situation. But we might want to think tactically about where is our best bet to get an act in place. Marie, I wonder if you've got any quick comments or thoughts about what Paul had to say, particularly perhaps the idea that you need, in addition to a commissioner, both a minister and an advisory body.
Yeah, and what I really loved, so I thought, Paul, your presentation was excellent. If you allow me, I will nick a lot of your slides, and I loved the parallel you made, to show where Canada is. So what really struck me is how advanced you already are in all of that, all the things you already have in place. So, which is great, because that's what has happened in Wales, is it was improving it and incremental progress. So I think you have a brilliant opportunity. And the other thing I was thinking about is, with the new UN Pact and Declaration for Future Generations, and you also that opportunity and momentum, which is sometimes needed in politics, to rally people, and we found really effective using the United Nations gravitas. So I don't know how things are in Canada. I hope better than with the US, but I'm sure I'm teasing. There's definitely something, and that international momentum not to be lost. And the other reflection I have is, because Wales is so small, we have 3.4 million people. You have such a huge country, and I have been thinking about that for England and for France and other countries, is thinking of the different levels of government and size. For example, I don't think it's possible for one commissioner to operate across the whole of Canada at the level of things we are doing. And so breaking it down and having a commissioner per state already is ambitious, but it's something to think about as well, is the logistic and how you transpose something we have for a small country on a bigger scale. And I'm very happy to have further conversations with you. And maybe something missing in your campaign is the role of your parliament. So in Wales, we have just started, because we have an increasing parliament as well. We have called for a future generations committee, or a committee of the future within the parliament as well, to ensure we future-proof legislation, but also really scrutinize much harder, the different ministers, other public bodies, etc. So I'm not sure if it's something very helpful for your model as well, but that's the initial thoughts which came for me. I was also really interested in the generational difference. So I'm curious now to see how well or bad our younger people are doing in Wales. It's not an angle we have explored yet, but something I will definitely want to discuss with you, Paul. But to me, it's also so this intergenerational fairness of the present, but also really understanding what it will look like in the future. So you always have this balance of intergenerationality in the present, intergenerationality in the future. Where are the inequalities growing, shortening? What are the levers? So then you can go, the wideness, but also the depth of time and getting into the future as well, because we need to do much more anticipatory work. I know it's called preventative work, but it's also anticipation, and we know as a planet we are not ready. We are not anticipating enough the things we know are coming, and we really need to improve what we are doing now for future long-term investment, if you want. So it's something I would add as well, the short-term, medium-term, and long-term investment for all these intergenerationalities.
Wonderful. I look forward to carrying that conversation on together as we go forward.
Brilliant.
And Trevor, I see there are already hands up from others.
Yeah. A quick point too, just to add, and then I'm going to ask Lindsay as co-chair of this series if she has any comments before turning to Richard van der Act. But the other hook we have in Canada is that Canada was a co-mover of the resolution recently at the UN supporting the International Court of Justice's opinion that governments have an obligation to act on climate change.
Yes.
And that is certainly something that extends to future generations and to the court cases around climate change and future generations that are underway. So it's just another hook to say you're already supporting it at the UN. Why aren't you doing it in Canada?
We should definitely integrate that into our.
Oh, sorry.
We should definitely integrate that detail more prominently into the campaign, including in the toolkit that I was mentioning earlier. We'll go in and do that shortly-ish.
Right, and I think you really should. So our minister who managed to get the legislation passed in Wales, she said it was really about having a plan, but also an opportunity. So she had the plan for a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in her pocket for a while, and she was really looking for opportunities, moments, and I think she tried to sell it to the First Minister of Wales several times before she had an opening and an opportunity. So her advice is have a plan in your pocket and take the opportunities you see. So that could be a great opportunity for getting it on ministerial desks and for action, because what you want is more than commitments. You want commitments and action.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Lindsay. I would just say to everybody, either raise your hand or pop a question in the chat, whichever works better for you. But Lindsay and then Richard.
Great, thank you. I don't have too much to say. I want to thank Marie and Paul very much for the excellent presentations, and I really appreciated how complimentary they were. Marie, I really appreciate your insight around the need for both federal and provincial action in our context. And Paul, I mean, I appreciate all of it, but your focus on money and spending is so important, and maintaining that core emphasis on the overwhelming amount of money that goes to medical care. Like, to me, that is such an important crux. And I love to see that so loud and clear. So just thanks very much.
And just in case it wasn't clear, when I'm talking about legislation that would appoint a commissioner, but also a minister and an advisory body, that's at the federal level and in every province. I think the trio needs to be the objective for every one of our provinces and territories.
And add to that Marie's parliamentary committee too.
Yeah, I think that the parliamentary committee would almost become an outcome of having a minister responsible, and then the parliamentary committee would be something to which the minister is engaging, reporting, and has accountability.
But you can do it the other way around to force having a minister as well. So it depends where the momentum is. Yeah.
It's in my notes. I'm learning so much about what we're going to add to the campaign.
Richard.
Yes, thank you. I enjoyed both talks. They're both very complimentary, and I enjoyed them a lot. Maria, I just wanted to ask you, since your work has started, can you give us an example of, or some examples of key public health metrics that have changed? For instance, rates of obesity or rates of cancer, things like that have changed for the better.
Yeah. So they have all changed for the worse.
Oh,
so that's a flat, how do you say, fact. What I wanted to try to do, because we know we are having impact, is how we have slowed, the drop in what we are having. And it's a big question, and our office is really trying to explore more how we can really help. But just to give you ideas, I'm asking now every single local health board how much of their budget, because I'm with Paul 100%, the money is really a key element, how much they spend really on public health. And often the response is 0.1% to 0.6%. So it's a big part of what's happening. And so what I'm trying to do is to give visibility of, so what's happening, who is investing in what, who should be doing what, where are the accountability lines. We are also starting from as I said, from the bottom of the UK. We've always had the poorest health of the nations, but it's going the wrong way. So that's why we have decided to prioritize this as a mission for our office. So the first commissioner didn't focus that much on health, but once we detected this, we created my mission and my work, which is really to help shake that up. But sadly, it's going the wrong way.
And I just popped into the chat some information about that from a BBC article quite recently. But yeah, it's not just Wales; it's across the UK as a whole. Health, I've expected
it is. Yeah.
But
And you have to remember that Wales, because of devolution, doesn't have many of the real levers. Social welfare or social protection and is not devolved. Our government is powerless against it, and so we have no tax raising powers, or very small. I think it's 3% of our whole budget is through national tax raising. So it's very complicated. And here it's not working, but that's why we are so happy to have campaigned and lobbied for increased focus on prevention. And the new government has even created a specific minister for that. So for us, that's where we are just starting to get to the problem. But it took a lot of mobilization and efforts, across the whole nation. So from ourselves, Public Health Wales, the NHS Welsh Confederation and others, to create this coalition demanding much more focus on prevention and public health, because as I was putting in the chat, nearly 55% of the whole Welsh devolved budget, or it's actually the whole budget, is going into health. And as I said, 90% of it is going into acute and social care a little bit. So the preventative investment is nearly non-existent, and we need to change that.
Music to the ears of a public health audience.
Yeah. I just received an award from the Public Health UK faculty for the work I am doing in prevention and public health, and because we are really putting it on the map, and we are really demanding change, enabling it, going in all directions. And I'm really focusing on finance, because that's the best hook I have found so far for people to actually change their behaviors.
So I think this makes very clear the reason why the health sector needs to get behind a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. I say the health sector, not the medical care sector.
Exactly. Yeah.
I am going to have to leave. I'm going to turn this over to Shannon and Lindsay to close up the final few minutes. I don't see any other questions at the moment, but happy to take further questions. I want to personally thank Marie and Paul for their presentation and for inspiring us to move on with this really important work. Thanks, and from me, goodbye.
Thanks, T.
Thank you,
Always appreciate your leadership and voice in this work. I did want to comment on a couple of elements of both your presentations, and I also was just reviewing the chat to see, and I think Megan might have a question as well. But I was very interested in the notion of ring-fenced funding, and the Public Health Association of BC has been for more than probably 15, 20 years calling for a 6% investment in prevention and promotion, the full pound of cure. And the Select Standing Committee some 20 years ago called for 10%. And so we've never approached that. And now in our jurisdiction, where there are very significant cuts to prevention, promotion, to public health, and in fact, to many of the programs that have been supported in the not-for-profit sector that lead to gains in population level outcomes, we're seeing even more stringent circumstance. And this is brought on by the global economy and the shifts in the tariffs, etc. So I'm very interested in what was the response to the notion of ring-fence funding for prevention and promotion. I personally have observed over a 40-year career that the bulk of healthcare dollars are situated within health authorities who are required to invest the bulk of those funds into acute care and to long-term care services. And so I'm just very curious about how you achieved or navigated that particular element of the Commission's frame.
Yeah, and just to come back to the last question as well, there's one indicator which has improved, so I need to say it as well. So it's the healthy behaviors of young people have increased. So well, but we have more mental health issue, we have more poverty, and we have more obesity. So, you know, it's all relative, but that's one which has definitely gone up. So to your question on ring fencing, so the Welsh government rejected that recommendation we made because they said they don't want to force where local authorities in particular are spending their money, and democracy and, you know, freedom of choice from local authorities which are elected is more important, so they are not wanting to ring fence. But then when you talk with local health boards, they are all operating on deficit budgets. Right. So any saving made disappears in the black hole. So that's why we keep on saying that's why you need ring fencing in any case. And so it was an outgoing government. So we are curious again to see what the new one will be saying. But the health committee in our parliament is also supporting the ring fencing. Mm-hmm. So another reaction to the ring fencing is more people are not too keen about it, but they say it's not really the problem. And I am really insisting in what matters most is the other part of the recommendation, which is increased investment in prevention year on year. And we've made it for the government and the local authorities. So everyone is on board with that one. And they are all genuinely trying to do it. But then they will keep on asking me, but Mary, where do we start? What gives? So our economy is not growing anymore, so there's not more money to come. So it's all about shifting now. So what do we stop in order to prioritize this? So that's the conversations we are having now. And I've also commissioned research and on what are the top 10 investments in prevention. So which ones have the best return on investment? But it's very subjective to decide what's your best return on investment. So I'm working with other organizations on the criteria. So we have a list of investments in prevention, which can be investments in libraries, for example. But it's how do you score and what's the criteria and scoring can be. So that's what we are working on now. So we will have a tool which will enable you to weigh yourself. So if you're the government, you might say, I want quick wins. And I want but I can invest a lot of money in it. And another body might say, I have hardly any money, but I have it. So you can change the different elements and weighing in the criteria. So the list will update and you will say, okay, so for you, the top 10 are, for somebody else, it would be this. And
so you have an adaptive model.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to go to Paul to comment as well on this. And then I want to make sure in the next 4 minutes that we at least get to and to just explain that ring fencing is a terminology that is applied to securing dollars for a particular functional area that cannot be drawn down by other demands within that portfolio. Okay, Paul?
Yeah, so it won't surprise people that I support the ring fencing concept, but I would say in this case, let's think about being more ambitious. I really do think that the call to have our budgets monitored, the ratio of spending, not just on public health, but on social and education issues and ecological issues more generally relative to medicine is something that we must be championing. And I see someone has put the BC Budget 2027 consultation is starting. I think we increasingly need those in the health sector, in the public health community to be saying it ought to become a priority to monitor that social and medical spending ratio as an incremental step, because that is actually a very efficient way to implement health in all policies at our highest levels of budgeting, which then ultimately determine what resources that are available to different ministries and then sub-department levels.
And I will just say that I'm making a presentation to this finance committee on Monday. And so this conversation today is also really helpful in terms of reinforcing our discourse. So I see some questions in the chat. Martin, did you want to go ahead? Martin O'Brien, did you just want to make a comment? Okay, I see Christiana's hand up. Christiana, please come off mute.
Hello. I just loved both of these presentations. It's really all I've been thinking about since graduating in public health. My one concern right now, well, one of the many, is the public element and storytelling and public movement. I really am motivated by all the work and thought that's being done here and shown in this presentation, but I have a fear with the way things have been going the last few years that this crisis and fear driving narrative in public, and I feel like it's been driving elections and taking attention from this preventative work and need. And so I feel like all this talk about sovereignty and build Canada strong, and a lot of it has been turning out to be detrimental to our future needs. Have you, like Marie, and I think it's interesting because I'm not sure about all the political side of things in the UK, but at least for Canada, I think it's a lot of it been driven by fear and conservative approaches about economy and funding, and people are scared about the cost of living and their future prospects. And also for Paul in the local context, how do you navigate that dialogue with the people, because they're going to vote, and I find a lot of politicians sometimes go to, well, the people aren't asking for it, but the people don't know what they need to ask for because it's so, the narrative online and media is so fear-based about the crisis is happening now and not how it can be so much worse in the future if we don't address this now.
Yeah, so we hear that all the time, and but we also have had big surprises. So each time we have a new commissioner, so every 7 years, they can only stay 7 years, and then it has to be a new one. So 3 years ago, the new commissioner came in, and we did a massive, involvement exercise, and we were really surprised that climate change and the environment, so biodiversity, as I commented in the chat, were the top of every categories of every people. So we had underestimated, and the politics do not reflect what the people really want. So we are doing a lot as well to show these surveys of opinion and that it really matters to people. It might not matter to you politicians, but real people, they do care, and they want you to do more and better about it. And so that's one thing. The other one is, and I think Paul talked about it, this intergenerational love and the act, because we talk about future generations all the time. So we don't talk so much about existing generations. It's more the present versus future generations. And they all care about their grandchildren and the children of their grandchildren. And so that really helps in the conversation. So even somebody who might be very right, traditional, still cares about their children, their grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren. And so that really helps, I think, in the concept. And then money-wise, that's what we are trying to refocus a lot of our communications around that. So energy bills are a huge problem in the UK. And so I think we have some of the highest energy bills in the world. And so we are changing a lot of our work into how can we do more community energy so that people can directly benefit and see their bills reduced. And so we are really trying to find all the ways and levers we can think about bringing us resilience. So we are also showing how fragile we are now with the global world around us. So how do we regain some of that nationally and give the money straight into people's pocket directly? And that's really helping as well. But we have, for the first time, a lot of extreme right representatives in our parliament. So I think it's 25% or something like that. So a huge chunk of our parliament. So let's talk again in 6 months, a year.
Yeah.
So to see if things are really changing in that relation. But they have prevention, regaining control of our health expenditure, making sure people regain their health. All our health indicators are going down. In one part of Wales, the healthy life expectancy of women is 44 years old.
My God.
How shocking is that?
Shocking.
So that's what we are fighting against. It's really bad. How, where, what, how can we really help? And we are really shaking the government to really address that and stop focusing on the old metrics. And also the last point on that is Wales has the highest rate in the UK of social enterprises. So we are seeing a new way of doing economics as well, which we are really proud of. So watch this space. We are really seeing a change. It's moving, it's evolving, some in the right direction, some which is not fully in our control. So it's more how we react as well to things.
Thank you so much, Marie. Paul, I want to give you a chance for a final comment before I say my thank yous.
Yes, Christiana, very quickly, because I see we're past time. You're right that we're really in a contest over framing. And I think you've identified how the Build Canada Strong does open up some interesting ways to redefine what strength is. And Trevor even, I think, mentioned earlier, natural sovereignty is national sovereignty. I think there's ways we can play with that. One of the details in the act that we are proposing for Canada's Fairness for Future Generations Act, et cetera, would say we have these well-being indicators or quality of life indicators at StatsCan. And so every quarter when StatsCan puts out new information right now about gross domestic product, it ought to be mandated to have a simultaneous report on a handful of those measures. So that the media comes out and actually starts not just talking about GDP as what's going on with our thriving or not, but also these other quality of life, aka well-being indicators. That's something that could happen right now. It doesn't take a lot of money, doesn't require the full legislation. And so as we're trying to make incremental progress, I would encourage us all to say, hey, supplement GDP quarterly reporting with some of the reporting from the quality of life indicators and require that it be part of the media releases.
Thank you so much, Paul. And I will say what gets counted counts. And what is visible there is the place where we tend to reinforce and re-embed policy and direction. So I really am deeply grateful to both of you for your critical analysis, for your courage, for your leadership and your voice. PHABC is deeply committed to exploring these questions more fully with our partners here today. And any of you that are interested, we have a policy advocacy research committee that meets regularly. We are working very hard around knowledge mobilization and discourse and exchange so that our workforce has the answers when the questions get asked. But I think there's so much more we can do in terms of advocacy around the larger political arenas, especially with respect to representation, civil society, and the not-for-profit sector. But this is an important opening discourse. Wales just declared the River Wye, the rights of nature. The River Wye has now got rights under the law and can be protected, which is a really exciting planetary health progressive step. So I thought I'd leave you on that very, very positive note that we're not alone here, that we have to respect all of our relations, and that a well-being society is a society that lives in harmony with the natural world. And finally, that we, as our attention focuses on the structural determinants of health, that we pay a lot of attention, not just to government spending, but to the work of commercial actors and how they are either providing health harming or health supporting. And that's the next question for Marie and Paul that we will be following up with them on. So thank you so much, everyone. If you have a follow-up question for this discourse, please don't hesitate to send it to us in an email. We're pulling everything together into a summary. And we can see some very clear steps going forward. And Marie, bless you for taking family time to reach to Canada with your commitment and your courage and your broad shoulders. The world needs you, and we're so grateful to you. And to Paul, I'm so glad you're here with us, and more work ahead. So everyone have a wonderful, wonderful day. Blessings to each of you. And thanks to T for getting us going once again, and to Lindsay for always keeping us stable and grounded as we grapple with these very large questions. So have a great day, everyone. Thanks, PHABC team.